In this section, we consider journalistic aggression as a form of conversational analysis. In other words, we apply microanalysis techniques to joint press conferences as we study the finer details in social interactions through analysis of film, audio tape, and videotape recordings. Microanalysis research has been conducted on broadcast interviews, political speeches, press conferences, and debates. But in this case, we focus on individual talking turns, whether journalists or the public figure, in an attempt to understand the finer details of journalistic aggression. The first step is defining conversational analysis. Conversation analysis looks for systematic patterns of social interactions that indicate practices by design that are, according to Clayman and colleagues in their 2007 article, recurrent, contextually situated, and attract responses that discriminate them from related or similar practices. The underlying assumption is that individual actions are not disorderly, but produce patterns, action by action, move by move, that should be studied as an entity in their own right. This means identifying a system by which questions can be analyzed. The question analysis system that is derived from conversational analysis sees 5 different conceptual categories in which there is journalistic aggression. The first is that of initiative, in which conceptually questions are enterprising rather than passive in their aims. Directness finds journalists asking questions that are blunt rather than cautious in raising issues, and may be measured through how other referencing and self-referencing occurs. Questions that invite a specific answer, and likely are opinionated and not neutral, measures assertiveness. Those questions that an agenda in opposition to the person being questioned are adversarial. Finally, accountability refers to questions that explicitly ask for justifications of policies or actions. Nicole Russell's insightful thesis provides not only highly useful examples of different types of journalistic aggression during the U.S. President Donald Trump's joint press conferences in his first year, she also does a wonderful job of analyzing the response of political figures through their use of political equivocation, which we'll address later. Questioning complexity is a form of initiative with prefatory or introductory statements used to provide context or other important information for the question. At the same time, this information is likely used to set a specific agenda. What this does is it makes it harder for the politician to respond by having them either validate or discredit facts. Politicians might have difficulty deciding which part of the question to answer first. In this clip, we see German Chancellor Angela Merkel and U.S. President Donald Trump during their March 17, 2017 joint press conference. Mark Halperin of MSNBC News asked a question showing level of initiative due to its complexity.
We'll do a couple of questions. Mark Halperin.
President, thank you. A lot of Americans now have anxiety, like 8 years ago, the government here debates what to do about health care. So I'm wondering if you can tell people what your bottom lines are, what's non-negotiable. You talked in the past about saying no one should deny health insurance if they can't afford it. You talked about no.
The gentleman needs to use a microphone.
Are those part of your bottom line? Would you veto any piece of legislation that violated those?
With question cascades, one question is followed up with another, and even a third, even though the same essential question is being asked in different forms. In this way, the journalist takes initiative by requiring the politician to process more information and address several different points at the same time. In this question, President Trump is faced with a question cascade from journalist Udi Segal, representing Channel 2 of Israel during the February 13, 2017 joint press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Mr. President, in your vision for the new Middle East peace, are you ready to give up of the notion of two-state solution that was adopted by previous administration? And will you be willing to hear different ideas from the prime ministers, as some of his partners are asking him to do, for example, annexation of parts of the West Bank and unrestricted settlement constructions? And one more question, are you going to fulfill your promise to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, and if so, when?
If a journalist is displeased with the politician's response, they can ask a follow-up question. Here, the journalist takes back the turn-taking process to the point of interrupting by requesting the political figure clarify their response. They can even go as far as directly questioning the answer given. Doing so poses a direct challenge to the political figure and their statements. It is a risky strategy as it may damage the prestige of the politician if not addressed effectively, and might backfire on the journalist. Here, we see Donald Trump responding to a follow-up question.
The question, sir, was what did you want President Zelensky to do about Vice President Biden and his son Hunter?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, it was just a follow-up of what I just asked you, sir.
Listen, you ready? We have the President of Finland. Ask him a question.
I have one for him. I just wanted to follow up on the one that I asked you, which was,
Did you hear
what
me?
did you want
Did you
him
hear
to
me?
Yes,
Ask
sir.
him a question.
I will, but
I've given you a long answer. Ask this gentleman a question. Don't be rude.
no, sir, I don't want to be rude. I just wanted you to have a chance to answer the question that I asked
I've
you.
answered everything. It's a whole hoax. And you know who's playing into the hoax? People like you and the fake news media that we have in this country. And I say in many cases, the corrupt media, because you're corrupt. Much of the media in this country is not just fake, it's corrupt. And you have some very fine people, too. Great journalists, great reporters. But to a large extent, it's corrupt and it's fake. Ask the President of Finland a question, please.
Okay.
Phrases such as can you, could you, will you, and would you leave politicians the opportunity to sidestep questions by other referencing. This is a strategy to diminish the aggressiveness of other aspects of a question by establishing a polite request. During the February 13, 2017 joint press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, U.S. President Donald Trump is the subject of other referencing by Katie Pavlich of townhall.com. Self-referencing occurs when journalists reference themselves using such terms as can I, could I, or may I. By asking permission while showing intention, the journalist shows rhetorical submission to the politician. This subtly creates an obligation by the political figure to respond to the question through a bond of politeness. In this clip, Christian Broadcasting Company's David Brody engages in self-referencing to ask President Trump a question during the February 13, 2017 joint press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Mr. President, in your vision for the new Middle East peace, are you ready to give up of the notion of two-state solution that was adopted by previous administration? And will you be willing to hear different ideas from the Prime Ministers, as some of his partners are asking him to do, for example, annexation of parts of the West Bank and unrestricted settlement constructions? And one more question, are you going to fulfill your promise to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, and if so, when?
Preface tilt, especially those using negatively formulated questions, are attempts to assert facts or statements deemed important without asking for confirmation. This approach uses yes-no questions and a negatively formulated question using phrases such as isn't it, aren't you, or don't you think to establish assertiveness. By doing this, journalists force politicians to address assertions they may disagree with, thus undermining the public figure's interest. In this video clip, we see Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau facing a preface tilt in a question by the Daily Caller's Caitlin Collins during his joint press conference with President Trump on February 15, 2017.
And Prime Minister Trudeau, you've made very clear that Canada has an open-door policy for Syrian refugees. Do you believe that President Trump's moratorium on immigration has merit on national security grounds?
This is a direct attack on the politician and their credibility. If not responded to effectively, it diminishes prestige. In this video clip, we see Richard Latendresse of Quebec's TV Nouvelles asking an adversarial question of U.S. President Donald Trump during his joint press conference with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on February 15, 2017.
Mr. President, I will ask my question in French first, and then for you, I'll ask it again in English. Monsieur le Premier ministre, vous savez bien, je vous ai bien entendu que les entreprises canadiennes, les exportateurs, les travailleurs canadiens
Canadian businesses, Canadian workers are concerned for their businesses and for their work and jobs concerning the renegotiation of NAFTA. So what guarantees did you get from this government that we will keep our jobs and our businesses in the renegotiation of NAFTA? Mr. President.
And again, during the last 3 months, you have denounced NAFTA. You have talked over and over about the Mexican portion of the agreement, very little about the Canadian one. My questions in two short part is Canada a fair trader? And when you talk about changes to NAFTA concerning Canada, are you talking about big changes or small changes? Thank you.
A final form of journalistic aggression occurs when a journalist asks for an explanation or account for actions. The implication of such accountability questions are that the politician has done something worth correcting. It often involves phrases, "Why would you?" and "How could you?" By asking for a response, the politician takes responsibility for something they said or did to a group of people. In this question, President Trump has asked for an explanation through an accountability question with a question cascade from journalist Moab Vardi from Channel 10 of Israel during the February 13, 2017 joint press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Mr. President, since your election campaign and even after your victory, we've seen a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incident across the United States. And I wonder, what do you say to those among the Jewish community in the States and in Israel and maybe around the world who believe and feel that your administration is playing with xenophobia and maybe racist tones?